The Canada Files viewers, this is Aidan Jonah, editor-in-chief of the Canada Files. Today I am speaking to Senator Yuen Pau Woo. He was appointed to the Senate of Canada November 2016. He served as facilitator of the Independent Senators Group from 2017 to 2021. And before he joined the Senate, he was president and CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Senator Wu, thank you for speaking with the Canada Files.
My pleasure.
Well, so who would have thought that ferries would produce such controversy in Canada, but bring China into it, and it's a whole new story. So ever since it was noticed that BC Ferries, which in short was privatized by the British Columbia provincial government in about 2003, they had contracted a Chinese state-owned shipyard build 4 new vessels for the passenger fleet. Selection was China Merchants Industry Weihai Shipyards. And then the outrage escalated when BC Ferries had got this 1 billion loan by the Canada Infrastructure Bank, specifically low interest, that ended up helping obtain the 4 Chinese-made ships. So, and then top it off, you've seen now hearings that are going to be happening with the Canadian Parliament, Canada, the Transport Committee of Canada's Parliament, at the direction of parliamentarians around this shipyard and procurement process. So now, Mr. Pau, now I reached out to you because you came out and publicly criticized this. So, given especially your experience with Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, even years before you became president, what was your first reaction when you saw this news and this fear that came from this procurement of, again, ferries?
Well, first of all, you started by saying what a surprise it is to have controversy over the purchase of ferries. You will remember, I certainly remember, that there was a huge controversy over the building of ferries domestically some decades ago now, not that long ago, the building of fast ferries, you remember them, by BC Ferries. We had local shipyards involved in building the so-called new design ferries that would speedily bring passengers from the island and to the mainland. And they turned out to be a massive disaster and a waste of money. So we've been down this road before, except that the previous episode was one in which there was blatant political intervention in the decision for procurement of ferries, and we tried to build them ourselves. With the privatization of BC Ferries and the, I guess, outsourcing of decisions to, I would have to presume, competent managers, we have to assign a certain amount of trust and responsibility and accountability to them for making decisions around such major questions as where to buy ferries. And if they've gone through a process that is rigorous, the politicians should stay out of those decisions and not impute extraneous motives and factors into that decision. So I think it's very misguided on the part of, first of all, the chattering classes to assume they know more about the procurement decision and process than BC Ferries did, and a mistake for the politicians to try to insert themselves into this story.
Now, what's interesting is that, of course, we're seeing an extension of the story through the Parliament Committee. I've written many times about how Parliament committees are used, and often when they come to China, they end up being with not so friendly ends, especially in the last few years, at minimum. Now, this action, I'm going to draw back in some history, of course, in 2021, the Uyghur situation and the motion that was passed in Parliament. Obviously, you became involuntarily a center of that. But when you see these things come through Parliament, they often end up in the Senate. if they succeed. So, do you see a interest in the Senate taking on this issue in such committees, or do you think this is something that would have to really be pressed upon to have any chance of being pursued there?
There's no natural pathway from the House hearings to the Senate. The House hearings are an independent decision of that committee, and whatever they decide to do does not translate into an automatic action on the part of the Senate. Of course, a senator could initiate a similar kind of inquiry, either at committee or through a motion in the chamber itself. I hope not, because it would be an utter waste of our time. Look, any parliamentary committee that wants to dig into this issue, really, there are only two angles, right? The first is some insinuation of um, national security harm to Canada, which would, you know, deter us from buying from the Chinese. Um, there are three, actually. The second one is the idea that China is unfriendly to us, has done some unfriendly acts, such as tariffs against canola and seafood products, and therefore we shouldn't be doing them any favors. And the third would be that the federal government, through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, should not be providing federal support for this purchase. All three are spurious arguments. The first one is based purely on yellow peril thinking, fear of the unknown, and is used. I think it would be used really just to cast suspicion on anything that comes from China. There are ways, obviously, to protect oneself from spying and national security risk. And there's no basis in any case to suspect that the Chinese shipbuilder would do anything nefarious with their boats. The second argument, in terms of retaliation against Chinese tariffs, is also spurious, because we are the ones who initiated the trade war when we imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. That's the only reason the Chinese reciprocated with their tariffs on canola, pork, and seafood products. So it would be hypocritical, to put it mildly, if we were to now say that we should not buy Chinese ferries because they impose tariffs on us. And then the third one, this idea that federal money should not be used to subsidize the purchase of ferries. Well, the real question is whether it is legitimate in the first place for the Canada Infrastructure Bank to support any decision on the part of BC Ferries to purchase new ships that provide service to Canadians. And if the answer is yes, there's really no reason to discriminate against the informed choice of BC Ferries, which turns out to be a Chinese supplier. So a parliamentary committee looking at this question really uh, would be indulging in gross speculation and considering questions that are, I think, out of their domain, as well as profoundly unfair to British Columbians, especially on the question of whether federal subsidy should be provided to British Columbia.
And now, quite interestingly, there's been reports publicly that there was no Canadian competitor for this bid that BC Ferries was looking for. And that's one of the narratives that you're seeing coming out, that this is why were the Canadian businesses not being considered here. But from the sounds of it, they just weren't competing in the first place.
Correct, including C-SPAN, which is the local shipbuilding entity, that is very busy already building other vessels for the Canadian military, Coast Guard cutters, and so on.
On the China front that you've been critical of. And it has a lot to do with Buddhists in PEI because I want to talk to you just about, this issue really and its leanings towards the Canada-China relations and the situation for Chinese Canadians. So, where do you think the situation for Chinese Canadians is heading in your view? Because you've been now very much in the last few months spearheading this national organization against McCarthyism in Canada, and that's why I want to ask you.
Sure, we're entering a very dangerous period of xenophobia and what I call modern exclusion. I'm, of course, making a reference to the original Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923, which barred all Chinese from coming to Canada and which required every Chinese person already in the country to register and to carry documentation with them, failing which they could be fined, jailed, or deported. Now, I don't think we're going to see that kind of blanket exclusion in the modern day. But there's a modern form of exclusion taking place, and it affects people with ties to China, but not just people with ties to China. It affects at different times, different minority groups. Muslims, of course, are particular victims of it. They were victims of it post 9/11. And today, in the light of the Palestine-Israel conflict, there are lots of Palestinians, Muslim and not Muslim, who are victims of modern exclusion. What modern exclusion does is that it seeks to distinguish between what some politicians and the intelligence and security and law enforcement agencies like to deem to be good Canadians and bad Canadians. And in the case of xenophobia, we are seeing a very troubling trend where the mainstream is looking to identify Chinese Canadians who are acceptable and those who are not. And those who are not are deemed to be unacceptable because of where they come from, sometimes because of their last names, because of who and which organizations they associate with, and because of the views they hold. Now, all of these are benign actions. You could be an alumni of Tsinghua University, for example, and Tsinghua University is part of the Chinese establishment. There are Communist Party cells within Tsinghua University. It's part of the United Front Work Department. Because of that, because you have an alumnus and you are proud of your connection to Tsinghua, which is a very good university, you can be deemed to be one of the unacceptable Chinese people in Canada and are excluded, in a sense, for that reason. And this is extremely dangerous, not just because of reputational risk and general stigmatization, but because we have now weaponized the law whereby somebody who is deemed to be in association with a foreign entity can be charged under the Security of Information Act and jailed for a maximum of life imprisonment. So this is a very serious thing indeed, and we're heading down this road because our politicians are too gutless to recognize the dangers to civil society and to recognize that we've been down this road before.
Well, certainly, and I mean, we're seeing this ongoing with the service centers in Quebec who had to take drastic measures to save buildings, even in the short term. So most certainly, we're seeing this on a very, very human level, this
Well,
impact.
people are going to be hurt. Like I said, this is not kind of run of the mill racism. There is racism involved, but it's not like the state and the media and a number of ideologues are targeting all Chinese people. It's more insidious and more dangerous than that. They are trying to identify the Chinese people they don't like because of their views, because of where they come from, because of who they associate with. And that's why it's particularly troubling because there will be some Chinese people attacking other Chinese people, saying that they're not loyal, they're spies, they're foreign agents. And the mainstream will buy into that argument. That is what's so terrifying about it. And like you said, lives will be hurt because it's not just that my feelings are being hurt. It's not just that I might be maybe shunned a little bit in my workplace. It is that you can be charged under the Security of Information Act simply for being in association with a foreign entity. What does that mean, even in the first place? And as I said already, the maximum penalty for this crime is life imprisonment. People are going to get hurt. And I think Canadian society and certainly the political class is oblivious to the danger that it's created through this bill, which is called C-70.
And I mean, the danger is extremely intense. There's things I've covered personally with the Canada Files. I think of the kill chain proposal was funded by Canada Heritage, which again, it's more general, but the impact, given the narratives and everything, is going to be towards the Chinese Canadian community. And again, we're seeing this kind of rhetoric towards this supposed Chinese foreign interference, which leads right into targeting of the Chinese Canadian community. And furthermore, this point you also touched on very wisely was, of course, one part of the Chinese community fighting the other, and the mainstream and the politicians taking their side. Part of that is because Global Affairs Canada likes one side a lot better. And there's one event I want to highlight, China Human Rights Forum Towards Accountability. They brought in separatists, people that want to break China up into multiple countries. They brought them and platformed them. And so it's hard for, I think, for a member of the Chinese community that maybe just wants to see cooperation with China or just simple neutrality to feel that their government is going to give them a fair shake. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I think that's correct. Now, let me be clear. Canadians can hold different views on political issues in China and any part of the world. I defend the right of Chinese Canadians who maybe want to see an independent Taiwan, or Chinese Canadians who are genuinely concerned about the human rights of Uyghurs or Tibetans or people in Hong Kong. That's their right to express their views and to make the government know how they feel. But it is wrong for them to then accuse other Chinese Canadians who hold different views on that subject to accuse them of being foreign agents. And this is exactly what is happening. The report that you cited, and there are other examples of initiatives by activist groups, associated with some of the movements you talked about. These groups are putting out information where they will essentially label someone, yours truly, as a potential foreign agent, a spy, a traitor, because of the views that person holds or because of the associations that they have. And this is fundamentally a violation of my human rights, of my civil liberties, and my freedoms. And here's the troubling part. As you said, our government departments and the law enforcement, the security agencies are indulging this kind of action. They are going on the cues provided by these activist organizations by also assuming that people who hold views that are not consonant with the activists are potential foreign agents.
Well, Senator Wu, all I'd like to do right now is ask if you have any further message for the CanFO's audience.
Well, what I would say is we need to think about this problem in a new way. Uh, there are a lot of people working on anti-racism initiatives, all very good work, but many of them don't quite understand that there's a special kind of racism emerging in society that is different and more dangerous and has to be dealt with and fought in a different way. I call it modern exclusion. And it's distinct, as I said earlier, because it doesn't necessarily target all Muslims or all Japanese or all Koreans, or indeed all Chinese, but it uses national security overreach and foreign interference hysteria, as well as a general fear of the other, to target certain segments of a minority population. The whole idea that there are some good Chinese and there are some bad Chinese. And this kind of approach appears to be more acceptable to the mainstream, even though we say we deplore the fact that we had a Chinese Exclusion Act. We deplore racism. We deplore exclusion. And yet this approach seems to be more acceptable, certainly to our politicians, right? And we have to identify this problem and say it very clearly that it is not acceptable. It is no less acceptable than a generalized racism against black people, for example. Because when you single out Canadians for harm based on their right to free expression and free association, you are undermining the very fabric of this society. So I would say to your readers and viewers that we need to call out this special new kind of, well, not so new, but a resurgent of a kind of exclusion in our society based on foreign interference hysteria, based on national security overreach. And we need to fight it. And we need to get our leaders to recognize that it is a new and serious problem.
Thank you for your time speaking with the Canada Files, Senator Wu. Now I will link to your Twitter and your senatorial website so people can look more from there. So the Canada Files audience, thank you for making it to the end of this interview. If you appreciate the journalism, please do set up a monthly annual donation, one-time donation, anything is appreciated there to support the work. And one more time, Senator Wu, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Goodbye, everyone.